Ada could still remember the exact moment her father's voice shattered her world. It was a humid Tuesday evening in their Lekki apartment, and the air smelled faintly of fried plantain from the kitchen. She had just returned from work when her father called her into the living room. His face was stiff, eyes sharp, and the envelope he held in his hand trembled slightly. The pregnancy test she had hidden in her bag was now in his grip. He didn't need to ask questions. The evidence was clear. "Ada, whose is it?" His voice was calm at first, but underneath it was a storm brewing. She opened her mouth to explain, to tell him about the man she loved, about the promises they made to each other. But the words got tangled with her tears. His calmness evaporated in seconds. "You have brought shame to my name," he roared, slamming the envelope on the glass table. The words hit her harder than she expected. Shame. That was all he saw. No thought of her as his daughter. No thought of the fact that she was still his child. No thought of the life growing inside her. She tried to plead, reaching for his hand, but he yanked it away as though her touch burned him. Within minutes, her belongings were shoved into an old duffel bag. Her stepmother stood at the corner, arms folded, lips twisted in a smirk that told Ada she had been waiting for this moment. "You should have thought about where you would go before opening your legs," the woman said coldly. Ada felt her knees weaken, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg. Her father ordered her out, the sound of the door slamming behind her, echoing in her ears long after she stepped into the cool Lagos night. She stood outside for a long time, numb, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and laughter from nearby houses. She had no plan, no money except the crumpled notes in her purse, and nowhere to turn. Her phone was heavy in her pocket, but she couldn't bring herself to call friends. She didn't want pity or judgment. She began to walk, not knowing where her feet were taking her. The streets of Lekki seemed different that night, colder, less welcoming. Neon lights from clubs and restaurants flashed, mocking her with a life she could no longer afford. Every honk of a car horn made her flinch, and every face she passed seemed to carry a mix of curiosity and indifference. As the hours dragged on, her legs grew heavy. She stopped at a small roadside kiosk to buy a bottle of water, counting every naira before handing it over. The shop owner looked at her with suspicion, eyes lingering on the bulge that was only beginning to show. Ada walked away quickly, embarrassed. She wandered until she reached a quiet street lined with closed shops. There, she sat on the steps of a boutique, pulling her bag close to her chest. She thought about the man who had promised to stand by her, but whose phone had gone off for days after she told him she was pregnant. She thought about the home she had just lost, the safety it once gave her even if it was far from perfect. The tears came silently, soaking the collar of her dress. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep warm as the city seemed to move on without her. She told herself she would only rest for a little while, then find somewhere safer to stay. But fatigue pulled her into a restless sleep. She woke at dawn to the sound of a street sweeper brushing leaves and dust into a pile. Her neck ached, her eyes were swollen, and her stomach growled with hunger. She rose and began walking again, determined not to spend another night like that. Somewhere in her mind, a small voice told her she could survive this. She didn't know how, but she knew she couldn't give up, not for herself, and not for the life inside her. She thought of her mother, who had died when Ada was only 12, and how she had always told her, "A strong woman is one who can stand even when the world wants her to crawl." By the time the sun was fully up, Ada found herself at a crowded bus stop. She blended into the morning rush, pretending to be just another worker on her way to a job. She decided she would go to Yaba, where she had once attended a training workshop. Maybe she could find someone there who remembered her, someone willing to offer her a small job. It was a long shot, but it was better than standing still. She boarded a danfo, clutching her bag and staring out the window as the city rolled by. The tall buildings, the street vendors, the impatient drivers, everything looked the same. Yet she felt completely disconnected from it all. The bus jolted to a stop at Yaba Market, and she stepped out into the chaos of traders shouting, music blaring from nearby shops, and the aroma of freshly baked bread mixing with the sharp scent of exhaust fumes. She took a deep breath and began walking. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she knew she had to keep moving forward. She had no father to return to, no partner to rely on, and no home to retreat into. But she had herself, and for now, that had to be enough. Ada's first weeks in Yaba were a blur of searching and surviving. She spent days knocking on doors, visiting small offices, and asking shop owners if they needed help. Most turned her away with polite refusals, some with dismissive stares, but she refused to let rejection crush her spirit. She found temporary shelter with a kind woman named Funke, a tailor who lived above her small shop. Funke didn't have much, but she offered Ada a mat in the corner of her room and a plate of food each evening. In return, Ada helped with errands and cleaning. When her pregnancy became more visible, finding a job became harder. People seemed to decide she was a burden before she even finished her sentence. Then one afternoon, while passing by a modest co-working space, she noticed a flyer pinned to the gate. Junior admin assistant needed immediate employment. She almost didn't go in, fearing rejection again. But something pushed her forward. The office was a small tech startup run by two young entrepreneurs who built apps for local businesses. They needed someone to manage calls, emails, and schedules. After a short interview, they agreed to give her a trial period. The pay was small, but to Ada, it was a lifeline. She threw herself into the job, arriving early and leaving late, learning not just her assigned tasks, but also how the business worked. She asked questions about coding, marketing, and client relations. Even when her feet swelled or her back ached, she refused to slow down. By the time her baby was born, a healthy boy she named David, she had saved enough for a tiny room in a shared apartment. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Balancing work and motherhood was exhausting. She would spend her days at the office, return home to feed and bathe David, then stay up late doing online courses on business management and fashion design. Fashion had always been her passion, and she began sketching ideas whenever she had a spare moment. On weekends, she bought thrift clothes from Yaba Market, altered them with Funke's sewing machine, and sold them to coworkers and friends. Slowly, people started to notice her designs. Her breakthrough came when a client visited the tech startup to discuss a new app. She was a wealthy woman in her 40s named Mrs. Lawson, dressed in a flowing silk caftan that spoke of quiet elegance. As Ada served her coffee, Mrs. Lawson noticed the dress she was wearing, a piece Ada had made from repurposed Ankara fabric. "This is beautiful," Mrs. Lawson said, running her fingers along the seams. "Where did you buy it?" When Ada shyly admitted she had made it herself, Mrs. Lawson's eyes lit up. A week later, Mrs. Lawson invited her to a private networking event for women entrepreneurs. Ada almost declined, feeling she didn't belong in such circles. But Mrs. Lawson insisted and even arranged childcare for David. That night, Ada stepped into a world she had only seen on TV rooms filled with confident women discussing investments, branding, and expansion. She introduced herself nervously at first, but soon she was sharing her story, and people were impressed by her determination. Mrs. Lawson became her mentor, guiding her through the basics of starting a fashion business. She taught Ada about sourcing quality fabrics, pricing her products, building an online presence, and pitching to clients. She even invested a small amount to help Ada launch her first collection. Ada worked tirelessly, turning her sketches into reality. She used social media to showcase her work, and orders began to pour in. Within 2 years, her brand, David Grace, had grown from a small Instagram page to a thriving business with a loyal customer base. She hired 2 tailors and rented a modest studio space in Surulere. Her designs blended modern elegance with African prints, appealing to both young professionals and older women who appreciated craftsmanship. Every success felt sweeter because she remembered the nights she had slept on shop steps, wondering if she would survive another day. Ada's transformation was more than financial. She had found her voice, her confidence, and her purpose. She no longer moved through the world apologetically. She walked into rooms knowing she belonged there. And although she had not spoken to her father since that fateful night, she knew that one day their paths would cross again, and when it did, he would see a woman who had built herself from the ground up, with nothing but grit, faith, and a fierce love for her son. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rooftops when the hum of an engine echoed down the quiet street. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop in front of her father's compound, its tinted windows reflecting the orange glow of the evening. Neighbors peered through their curtains, curious about the expensive car that had just arrived. The driver stepped out first, opening the back door, and then Ada emerged. She was dressed in a fitted navy jumpsuit, her hair styled in soft curls that framed her face. Beside her, David clutched her hand, now a lively 3-year-old in a crisp white shirt and tiny sneakers. Her father was sitting on the veranda, sipping tea, when he looked up and froze. For a moment, he thought he was seeing a vision. The little girl he had thrown out was gone. In her place stood a woman whose poise and confidence filled the space before she even spoke. His eyes darted to the child and something in his chest tightened. David's curious gaze met his, and in that instant, he saw his own features mirrored back at him. Ada walked slowly towards him, her heels clicking against the concrete. She didn't rush, didn't shrink, and didn't lower her eyes. When she stopped in front of him, she offered a polite smile. "Good evening, Daddy." Her voice was calm, steady, with no trace of the trembling girl he had last seen. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words tangled somewhere between his throat and his guilt. She gestured for David to greet him. "Say hello to your grandfather." The boy gave a shy wave. Behind her, 2 assistants carried in boxes beautifully wrapped packages for her younger siblings and groceries for the household. Neighbors had begun to gather outside the gate, whispering and pointing, recognizing Ada from her brand's billboards that had gone up in Lagos months earlier. Her father's wife, the same woman who had mocked her 3 years ago, now hovered in the doorway, speechless. Inside the living room, Ada placed an envelope on the table. "That's for the renovation you wanted to do," she said casually. "Consider it a gift." Her father stared at the thick stack of notes inside, feeling a mixture of pride, shame, and regret twist in his stomach. He wanted to apologize, to tell her he had been wrong, but the words felt too small for the damage he had done. As she prepared to leave, David tugged at her hand. "Mummy, can we come again?" She smiled down at him. "We'll see." Then she turned back to her father. "I didn't come here because I needed anything. I just wanted you to know I'm doing fine. Better than fine." With that, she walked out, her head held high. The SUV door closed behind her, and as the car pulled away, her father remained on the veranda, the taste of his tea now bitter on his tongue, realizing the daughter he had once rejected had returned not broken, but unstoppable.
Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe for more teachable and inspiring folk tales by FE.